So, recently did an episode on the 350 Legend. Did a whole episode on that one cartridge. But in talking to the Patreon Insider Chat, which I'd encourage you to be part of if you like to talk about guns and want a like-minded tribe of strong Christian men, iron sharpening iron. But the topic came up, and I think it's a good one to discuss. The kind of other, let's call it decent medium game hunting options in the AR-15 platform without bumping up to the AR-10. And I think those would be, and there are many others, but the main ones that come to mind. The 350 Legend, the 6.8 SPC, and the 6.5 Grendel. So that's what we're going to discuss today. Those three, where they fit in a hunting and maybe quasi-survival defensive do-it-most AR-15 cartridge platform. Hopefully that interests you in this audio thought experiment. Here on Gunfighter Life, where we talk about guns and gunfighting the right way, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. I am your host, Michael Milito. I might put the bio in at the end, but many of you have probably heard it before. So let's get into the meat and potatoes of this episode. The AR-15. One of the things that makes it popular and versatile is it's kind of Legos for boys, for men. For whatever reason, the serialized part of that, and I know why, but the serialized part of that is the lower. The lower is a super simple, basic, usually aluminum, maybe even plastic. Pretty simple thing that everything else bolts onto, which means you can customize your AR. You can make a long-range precision AR. You can make a door-kicking, up until fairly recently, AR pistol with a brace to be a very good CQB defensive and truck gun. You can make yourself a good grizzly bear defense, personal defense weapon if you got it in, let's say, a 458 SOCOM loaded with solid coppers, all the way down to a dedicated 22 for plinking and or shooting squirrels. Such is the flexibility of the AR-15. And there is an entire podcast, the AR-15 podcast. I'm not going to turn this into that, but it is America's most popular rifle model, I do believe. Narrowing that vision in a little bit to medium-sized game hunting as our primary, and then maybe some other secondary or tertiary roles for this cartridge. Specifically three, I think, that do this well for medium game hunting. Reverse order of what I mentioned them before, going by bore diameter, the 6.5 Grendel, the 6.8 SPC, and the 350 Legend. Let's start off with the 6.5 Grendel. A lot of this is going to be from memory. If I look something up, I'll try and give you the source, because you should give credit where credit is due, honor where honor is due. That's biblical. But from memory, I do believe the 6.5 Grendel is kind of a strange cat in that the 7.62 by 39 is not actually its parent case, but it might as well be. It was, I believe, necked down to the 22 by 39 of the 5.6 by 39 as a Wildcat off the 7.62 by 39 for more of that Eastern European kind of hunting Wildcat. And it became popular. And then taking that 22 by 39 or 5.6 by 39, which never really was super popular here in America, and necking it up to 6.5, you get the 6.5 Grendel. If you know anything about the 6.5, you'll know that it's a good, really good bullet diameter. It took us a long time to catch on. You know, the Swedes knew this back in the 1800s, and they have a round that's pretty much equivalent to, especially in hand loads, the 6.5 Creedmoor, and they did it back in the 1800s. The 6.5 Grendel makes use of that same bullet diameter, but not quite as flexible. The 6.5 Grendel, you might think of like the 6.5 Creedmoor, common long-range bullet loadings in the 140-ish grain weight. I even have some, I think, that are 156 grains. The 6.5 Grendel, since it's a smaller cartridge and has to fit in the AR-15 and feed, and you can't bump it back too far because you don't have that much powder capacity, you're generally topping out at the 120 or 120 something-ish grain bullets. You're not getting quite the versatility that you would get with a larger 6.5. But you still get to take advantage of that good high BC in general 6.5. It's also perhaps one of the most efficient cartridges you could pick for this role. Medium game hunting in a short AR package. Since it's based on the 7.62x39, that's a pretty common, rim diameter, but it comes with its own challenges. The AR was not designed for that. The AR was designed for the 223. If you look at the bolt and the bolt face and the extractor, they're not necessarily the most robust to begin with, and you have to bore out, for lack of a better term, maybe that is the correct term, you have to bore out a lot of that material in order to get that to work. So you're taking a system that many would argue is not the most reliable to begin with, and doing a bunch of workaround stuff to get it to chamber the 6.5 Grendel. A far more tapered cartridge, which has its advantages in the AK, but which means you're going to have to re-engineer and get totally different magazines for the AR-15. Different feed geometry, different bolt face, different magazines, all that stuff. So there's a trade-off there. When I would pick this one, where I think it would shine is if my idea of medium game hunting with an AR was towards the longer range. If I was doing this and for some reason I wanted to use the AR and I was in the southwest, right? Pronghorn, mule deer country, medium game, when I see a coyote and I want to take it, I take it. But mule deer, capable. Pronghorn, capable. Javelina, capable. Certainly. In that whole desert southwest, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, and the like, of which I've spent a large chunk of my life in that area. There is a beauty in the desolation and desertedness of the desert. For that role, if I was going with this, I would probably go with a full-length, either 20-inch barrel or even longer, 22-inch barrel, 6.5 Grendel. It shines. I think it does the best out of these three options at the longer ranges. If you were talking about shorter ranges, which most deer are taken at, even in this environment in my experience. If you're talking about a gun for inside of 200 yards, I don't know that it's the best option out of these. It's probably still the most efficient option. Now, to give credit where credit is due, let me look this up. I would normally look it up in Cartridges of the World, a gift from a patron, but since the 350 Legend is too new to be in that book, and I like to compare apples to apples, let me see if I can look it up on the Wikipedia. So, came out in 2003, it says. Something I didn't know, and I was misquoting. I guess the actual name of that Russian round is the .220 Russian. You got some different loads here, all the way down to a 90 grain at 2880. And what I would call your more traditional loadings in this, your 120 grain at 2700, that's respectable. And 123 grain at 2650. Reading from the wiki, the 6.5 Grendel cartridge was first unveiled in 2003 at the Blackwater Training Facility in North Carolina, where it remained supersonic at 1200 yards. That's impressive. If you know about long-range shooting, transitioning that transonic barrier, going from supersonic to subsonic, can create some problems. Again, if that was your goal, really long-range shooting, that's kind of what this was made for. So if that is your goal, this is kind of the cartridge that shines there. Now, let's talk about the next one on the list, the 6.8 SPC. The 6.8 SPC, and this is going from memory, and again, I'll probably look it up on the wiki. But unlike the 6.5, this is 6.8 or .277, commonly shared with the venerable and storied 270 Winchester, the military's new .277 Fury, the 6.8 Western, that 277 diameter, which I think was pioneered by the 270 Winchester, but it shares that same bullet diameter. So you get some good options there. And I believe it was settled on because it gave the best performance as far as external ballistics and terminal ballistics when they were trying, and by they I mean SOCOM. This is a SOCOM developed round for SOCOM. Special Operations Command. Apparently, the SOCOM people, they were not super happy with the terminal ballistics of 5.56, which I get. That round, to go off on a tangent, which maybe that's part of the reason why you're here, my thoughts and opinions on these things, based on real-world experience. It's not a good round for stopping people. It's a varmint round. It was developed from the 220 Remington, which is a varmint round. It's good at a varmint round. It's good up into coyotes for, decent put down of those size critters. Never was, I don't think, developed for being able to stop men quickly. I think it was developed for fighting the Russians, carrying massive quantities of ammo, facing a mass conscript army, and carrying a large quantity of ammo with a civilized and traditional military, where if you wound somebody, they're going to take care of their wounded. So wounding somebody not only takes them out of the fight, but takes one or two people to render aid to that person, which is perhaps seen at the time as good or better than killing the person, which makes sense at the time for the enemy we were facing. However, with the war on terror, myself and many others faced radical Islamic jihadists wanting to kill, put an end to Christianity, destroy the Western culture, and you might not think that's politically correct, but that's what happened, and that's what it is. And they're determined attackers. They're generally wanting to fight to the death, and if you wound them and they can still fight, as per their theology, they're going to fight. So wounding them is not as good a philosophy, right? You want to stop them, and that's what we faced in the global war on terror, of which I took part. That's where we found ourselves. And SOCOM looked at that and said, this round, not so hot. Let's see if we can do better. And they came up with the 6.8 SPC. And I think, do the research for yourself, but I think they concluded it is better, but it's going to cost a lot of money to convert all these M4s and stuff, M4s, M16s, to 6.8. So let's just keep what we have. We'll have a few in inventory for special stuff, and that's basically where that cartridge, I don't want to say died, but got stuck in limbo. So it has a small niche following, I think predominantly among what we're talking about today, medium game hunting, especially talking about like hogs in Texas, where feral hogs are a problem, filthy swine that are destroying the landscape, and shooting many of them is legal, and you want a good semi-automatic potent round that fits in an AR-15, because it's, again, America's most popular rifle model, that has better terminal performance. And it's stuck around there. It's not the only place, but I think that's where it's most popular and where it's really found its niche, that 6.8 SPC. You're going to get a little bit heavier bullets, a little bit bigger bore diameter, and I think it's a really well balanced. And since it was developed originally for defense, if you're looking at a cartridge that you want for medium game hunting, but you also want for defense, like you want your one rifle to be this specialized round AR-15. General purpose carbine, but you want it to have better terminal performance, because let's say you're mostly a hunter. You're mostly going to hunt deer and hogs and things like that, but you also may want it for defense. I think your best option here is the 6.8 SPC. Now from the wiki, 6.8 Remington Special Purpose Cartridge, SPC, is a rimless bottleneck intermediate rifle cartridge, blah blah, Remington Arms, collaboration with the U.S. Army Marksmanship Unit, blah blah, Special Operations Command, to possibly replace the 5.56 NATO cartridge in short-barreled rifles and carbines. Based on the 30 Remington cartridge, so that's its parent case, and is midway between the 5.56 NATO and the 7.62 by 51 NATO in bore diameter. Came out actually right about the same time, 2002 to 2004, so this was right around the start of GWAT. Now, if we look at some common data, and you can get all kinds of different loads, but I'm looking here at Wikipedia, again to compare apples to apples. 115 grain at 25.75. 120 grain, so you're right there with the same kind of bullet weight as we talked about the 6.5 Grendel at 24.60. It lists 110 grain at 2,500, and this is impressive. It lists a factory load for the Barnes TSX, which I'm a big fan of for hunting. Solid copper monolithics, what we refer to as solid copper or gilded metal bullet, are not just for hippie hunters in California. They are a good terminal performing round. It lists an 85 grain solid copper at over 3,070. That, as the younglings say, as the young millennials say, that's bussin'. That's a legit round right there. One big advantage I see to this cartridge is that, and I see conflicting stuff in here, but you should be able to use your regular magazines for an AR, which is a big thing, because if you're talking about this, if you're talking about medium game hunting, there's a lot of better options. If you're talking about hunting with an AR, you're probably an AR guy, which means you probably have quite a few AR mags. The ability to use the regular magazines is a big thing. You may want to get some specialty mags or mark them or get a different follower, but it looks like, unlike the 6.5, you can use the same magazines. You will, however, need a different bolt face. Whether they bore out as much material as the 6.5G, I'm not sure. But that's the 6.8 in a nutshell. Let's talk about the other one. The new kid on the block. The 350 Legend. A round I don't like in principle, but it's pretty good as far as terminal performance. And I just did an episode on this, so I'll rehash it briefly. I'm sad that it came about through legislation, forcing people to have to hunt with straight-walled cartridges. I think you as a red-blooded American living in America should be able to hunt with cartridges that have been around for over 100 years. Right, the 7mm Mauser came out in the 1800s. You should observe your 4 firearm safety rules, and you should be able to take deer if a deer is legal to take with a rifle, with whatever normal rifle you want to take it with, 308, 30-06, 243. The fact that they passed legislation mandating a straight-walled cartridge. So the 350 Legend kind of came out of that for these states where they don't, I guess, want you to hunt with a regular cartridge. They wisely, though, I think, designed it to go into an AR-15, which is why it's on this list. But if you look at it ballistically, it's pretty much identical. I looked up loads for the 150 grain 350 Legend and the 150 grain 30-30, which would be illegal to hunt with. So think about that. You could hunt with a 350 Legend and an AR in these states. Totally safe, they say. But you can't hunt with an old grandfather's old lever action Winchester 94 and 30-30. Even though ballistically, get this, I looked it up, Winchester makes an XP load, a hunting load for deer. Both of the 350 Legend and the 30-30 list a 150 grain bullet at almost identical velocities. You're talking within tens of feet a second at well over 2,000 feet a second. So, for practical purposes, pretty much the same. But it's straight wall, so you could hunt with it. And you could even hunt with it in an AR in some of these states, I think. Anyway, putting that aside, if I put aside my disdain for the reason it exists, and look at it on paper, again, looking at it 150 grain, it's pretty much identical to the 30-30. The 30-30 is perhaps one of the best, if not the best, whitetail deer hunting rounds in history, period. And again, if you want to hunt with an AR, because let's face it, AR is not the best hunting tool, implement, rifle. But if you decide you want to do that, and you want that good performance similar to a 30-30, then here you go, your 350 Legend. 350 Legend is fairly new, I believe 2019. It's much bigger in diameter than these other ones, obviously, because it's a straight wall, which just means the diameter of the bullet pretty much goes straight back. There's probably a slight taper, but it's not bottlenecked like most modern cartridges. It's more like if you think about a 357 Magnum. Actually, very similar to that. Just without the rim, loaded to somewhere in between that pressure and, rifle pressures. But a straight-walled cartridge, there is some debate whether it's .355 diameter or .357 diameter, which is a few thousandths of an inch difference. Practically speaking, not enough to make a difference, but do your due diligence for reloading. This one developed by Winchester. No parent case, so it's its own thing. If we look at some load data, I see here on Wikipedia, 160 grain at 2,300 feet a second, 165 grain at 2,200 feet a second, and a 180 grain at 2,100 feet a second. So it's quite a bit heavier than the ones we looked at, and a little bit lower velocity, but it's still in that same ballpark, right? If we go to like the 458 SOCOM or the 450 Bushmaster, those are better compared, I think, to themselves. These cartridges are decent, intermediate range, medium-sized game cartridges, which is why we're comparing them today. If you are more of the thought of bigger, heavier bullet, I'll give up some velocity. Like if you're more in the camp to compare it to handguns, if you're like, I'm a 45 ACP guy, I'll give up some velocity for some bullet mass, as opposed to a 9mm guy. Then this might be the cartridge for you. You're getting a heavier bullet. We just looked at a 210 grain loading. It's going to be far heavier than any of the options hitherto discussed. If you're talking about many places east of the Mississippi, where the average deer is taken well inside 100 yards, ballistics coefficient, as much as it's bantered about and doted over in today's gun culture, inside 100 yards, ballistics coefficient is an academic discussion. It's academic more than practical. If you doubt that, look at these numbers, go punch them into a ballistics calculator for yourself, and see how much at 100 yards the 350 Legend drops versus the best one on this list, the 6.5 Grendel. At 100 yards, you'll see the difference on a deer, on a hog, for defense is academic. If you're talking about kind of a brush gun, and especially if you're talking about short-barreled brush gun kind of carbine, I grew up hunting in the South. A poor boy in the South, public lands, but not part of the landed gentry with large farms and bean fields to hunt, really. I was relegated a lot of times to the swamp, where nobody else really wanted to go. You're talking about southern swamps, anywhere, cypress swamps, anywhere from Virginia to Louisiana. Places like that where it's a mathematical anomaly that the local flora lines up to allow you to see more than 50 yards. And 100 yards is generous. For places like that, I think this is a good option. This is even a good option out to 200 yards. But if I was planning on taking many shots out to 200 yards, I'd probably go with one of the others. But if you were looking for a short, handy brush carbine in an AR-15, this would probably be my go-to if it was for hogs, for deer, for things like that. That's where I think this one shines. And again, ballistically, I have no problem with this round. I think it performs very similar, although it's a little bit different if you talk about sectional densities and stuff, but very similar to the 30-30. Very common loadings in that are going to be, 150 to 170 are both real common. This one you can go a little bit heavier, but the common grains, it seems like, are right in line with that. And the 30-30 is a great round. And from a performance standpoint, I don't see why this one wouldn't be at short ranges. This round, unlike the two that we talked about, one was designed for kind of long range shooting in the AR, which I think is where it still shines. And the other one designed for more terminal performance in a defensive role, which I think is where it shines, the 6.8. This one was designed as a medium game round that also fits in an AR, and I think that's where it shines. If you wanted a good crossover, I'd go with the 6.8. If you wanted a long range, you go with the 6.5 Grendel. And if you wanted a close range, decent medium game cartridge, the 350 Legend. And that's kind of where I sit on these. Another thing I'd like to mention, I did some research on Midway USA. I don't have corporate sponsors on here, guys. I just have used Midway USA for years. They're a good company. They have a lot of selection and product, especially when it comes to hunting and outdoor type stuff. I just use them to look, to give credit where credit is due. They're not paying me to say any of this. But again, per the Bible, you give credit where credit is due. When I looked at the ammo availability, it seemed surprisingly pretty linear between the two. There are minor differences, but when I look up the 6.5 Grendel, I got 13 for rifle ammunition. When I looked at the 6.8 Remington, I got 16. And when I looked up the 350 Legend, I got 17. So, pretty linear there. There's a little bit of difference, but not a dramatic one. And if you consider that the 350 Legend is by far the newest round, then it's kind of the hot new round that the gun companies and ammunition companies are trying to push on us, then what is that availability going to be like in a couple of years? I don't know. Some cartridges really catch on. The majority of new cartridges, I think, that are introduced every year at best become a niche cartridge, and some become pretty obsolete pretty quick. The straight-walled cartridge laws, if they stay in place, who knows whether they'll stay in place or not. And there's already a couple of other rounds trying to usurp that round, the 360 Buckhammer and the 400 Legend. So how popular that round will stay is up for debate, but as of right now, they're pretty comparable as far as ammo availability goes. So no clear winner there. Now, all three of these cartridges, I believe, are going to be available in other options, bolt guns. And here's my main thing about this. I love hunting. As you probably know if you've listened to the bio before, I've been a professional gunfighter most of my adult life. But I see guns as tools. Different roles for different things, right? I'm not going to use a bandsaw when I need a circular saw unless I absolutely have to. Will it work? Sure. Will it cut wood? Yeah. Maybe a better analogy would be tactical to hunting world. I can cross-cut a 2x4 with a hacksaw meant for metal. It'll do it given enough time. But a crosscut saw works way better. Think about what you're going to spend on an AR upper. Even if you're going to use the same lower, same trigger, which many people are probably just going to go out and buy a whole new gun, but let's just say you're going to buy a new upper, new bolt in many of the cases we talked about today, and a new optic because you're going to mount that on the upper, right? So you talk about all that money. And will it be an okay medium-sized game round? Sure. Will it be an okay platform? Yeah. But it probably isn't going to be as good as a bolt-action rifle in 308 6.5 Creedmoor, which is a different ballpark than the 6.5 Grendel, or take your pick, 30-06, 270 Winchester, right? These are better hunting cartridges, period. And a bolt-action, I think, points a little bit better. You get a little bit more robust action. Unless you're talking about very niche applications like hunting hogs from a helicopter. In that case, yeah, the 6.8 makes sense in an AR. But in most hunting applications, do you really glean the advantages of the speed of a semi-auto versus a bolt action when you have to reacquire the target, and likely that target has moved? So in between that time, you can likely cycle the bolt. That being said, what you're going to spend on an upper and an optic and a bolt and maybe different magazines, what can you get a good Savage Axis in 308 or 243 or 270 for? Probably less money, and it's a better tool for the job. Or a Ruger American, or many other good, affordable bolt-action rifles. Probably even find a good used Savage 110, in 308 or 30-06. But if you did want to go this route, if an AR is the rifle that you know and you want to stick with it, or again, you want that kind of do it most. You're not a gun collector. I'm not a gun collector, but I have, dedicated hunting guns and fighting rifles. But let's say you want that one intermediate, medium-sized game round in your AR that you're going to carry as a truck gun. You're going to hunt with it, maybe going around the ranch. Then these may make sense for that. Anyway, those are kind of my thoughts for this thought experiment. I think it will intrigue many, many people, I think, are looking at these different cartridges. And hopefully the training and experience God has blessed me to get through helps, see these things more soberly. Behind the marketing, behind the numbers, behind the hype, to kind of looking at it circumspectly and making a good informed decision. Anyway, with that, I hope that you are subscribed to the podcast. I hope that you share it with somebody you think might like it. This episode or any other episode. Like I do one on an AK, and you're like, hey, my buddy is an AK guy. Share the episode with them. Like, share the podcast. Blessings are meant to be shared. If this podcast bless you with any amount of knowledge, share it with others. Blessings are meant to be shared. Like, subscribe. If you want to be a part of the tribe, an active participant, consider becoming a patron. There should be a Patreon link in the show notes. As a thanks for listening to this episode, the tactical tip and the tactical verse of the day. Whether you're talking about an AR or a bolt-action rifle for hunting for defense, likely it's equipped with a sling. At least I think it should be. Here's my tactical tip. Get a sling that's not black. One, I don't like black. It's one of the least, in my opinion, blend-in colors that are common. Olive drab, coyote brown, tan, they all blend in more environments, I think, than black. But I guess if you got black, you could just get a different color. But I like, olive drab or brown slings. Slings aren't that expensive. Write your dope for that gun and that load. That just means your gun data, gun dope. Write it on the sling itself. Gun zeroed at 50 yards and 220 yards with 125 grain Winchester XP. That's just a pretty close approximation of my go-to guiding rifle. If it's your AR, zeroed at 50 yards with Winchester White Box 55 grain XM193. You can write that data down range. You can, 1.3 inches high at 100 and half an inch low at 250 and then 12 inches low at 350. And you can extrapolate that out. Those are probably pretty close numbers, actually, I think, because just thinking about the data on my go-to fighting AR. But you get the idea. Write it on the sling. It's a good place for it. Probably not going to lose it. That's your tactical tip of the day. Your tactical verse of the day. How about from a man after God's own heart? David, a slayer of beasts and men. A man after God's own heart. Let's see what this man after God's own heart says here in 1 Samuel. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you and take your head from you. And this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Then all this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with a sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into my hand. The battle is the Lord's, men. 1,000 may fall at my side, 10,000 at my right hand, but it shall not come near me. Only with my eyes shall I look and see the reward of the wicked. That's from Psalm 91. Or Psalm 144, blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Don't be kind of blinded by the truth by some beta version of Christianity. God is strong. God is a warrior. The Lord is a man of war. That's straight biblical. Exodus 15, the Lord is a man of war. You are made in the image of God. There's a lot that goes into that. But we see here, David, a man after God's own heart, a slayer of beasts and men. He made good on that promise. He stood over Goliath and cut his head off with his own sword. And he went on to kill many other men. A man after God's own heart. The right way. God gives prescribed times when it is okay and when it is not to take life. But there is no contradiction in being a strong warrior and being a man of God. With that, thanks for listening and have a blessed day.